The photograph had been tucked inside a book for 37 years. I found it on a Tuesday, during the kind of rain that makes you believe the whole world is crying. The book was The Little Prince, my son's favorite, the one with the crinkled pages where he used to press autumn leaves between the chapters. I hadn't opened it since 1986. Not really. Not all the way. But that morning, something pulled me to the shelf. Something that felt like a hand on my shoulder. The photo fell out face up, and there he was, Johnny Gosch, age 12, grinning at me from a school picture day in West Des Moines, Iowa. His hair was the color of corn silk, parted neatly on the left. His smile was the kind that made you believe the world was still safe. I didn't know Johnny. I'd never met his mother, Noreen, though I'd seen her on the news so many times that her face had become a permanent scar on my memory. But here's the thing about that photograph, I had no idea how it got into my book. I'd never been to Iowa. I'd never owned a copy of that school portrait. And yet there it was, staring up at me from the hardwood floor, as if it had been waiting all these decades for me to finally be ready to see it. My name is David Holloway. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in a small house in northern Minnesota, where the winters are long and the silences are longer. My wife, Margaret, died 6 years ago. My son, Daniel, died before that, not in the way Johnny Gosch died, not vanishing into thin air on a September morning while delivering newspapers. Daniel died in a car accident when he was 19. Drunk driver. A tragedy with a clear beginning, middle, and end. An obituary. A grave. An answer. Johnny Gosch had none of those things. For those who don't remember, or those who were born after the nightmare began, on September 5, 1982, a 12-year-old boy left his home in Des Moines before dawn to deliver the Sunday morning newspapers. He never came back. No body. No arrest. No closure. Just a hole in the universe shaped like a child. His mother, Noreen, spent the next 4 decades falling into that hole over and over again, trying to fill it with flyers and press conferences and private investigators and theories so dark they would make your blood turn to ice. She never stopped. Even when the world moved on. Even when the news truck stopped showing up. Even when people started whispering that maybe she should let go, move on, accept the unacceptable. Noreen Gosch never accepted a damn thing. And neither, apparently, had I. Because here's the part one haven't told you yet. The part that made me pick up the phone that rainy Tuesday morning, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Underneath Johnny's photograph was a note. Handwritten. In my handwriting. It said, "He came back. You know he came back. And you did nothing." I don't remember writing those words. That's what I told myself for the first hour, pacing my living room while the rain hammered the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. I don't remember writing them. Maybe Margaret wrote them. Maybe Daniel. Maybe I found the note somewhere else and tucked it in the book without thinking. But the handwriting was mine. The slant of the letters, the way I cross my *T**s with a sharp upward flick, the way my *G**s loop back on themselves like fishhooks. That was my hand. My voice. And yet, nothing. A blank wall where the memory should have been. I did what anyone would do. I Googled Johnny Gosch for the first time in probably 20 years. And that's when the story stopped being a distant tragedy from another decade and started becoming something else entirely. Something that made me turn off all the lights and sit in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat. Because here's what I learned that afternoon. In the late 1990s, Noreen Gosch began making extraordinary claims. She said that Johnny had visited her, in person, as an adult, in 1997. She said he came to her home in the middle of the night, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize. She said he told her he had been kidnapped by a network of pedophiles, trafficked across state lines, forced to do unspeakable things. She said he told her he couldn't come home, couldn't go public, couldn't risk the safety of his family. She said he stood in her living room for over an hour, a grown man with his mother's eyes, and then walked out the door and disappeared again. The public reaction was brutal. She was called a liar. A narcissist. A grieving mother who had lost her grip on reality. The media, which had once treated her with kid gloves, turned cold. The police dismissed her story as fantasy. Even some of Johnny's own family distanced themselves. And Noreen, already carrying the impossible weight of a missing child, now had to carry the weight of being called crazy, too. I read all of this on my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue glow across my face. And as I read, something began to stir in the back of my mind. Something like a dream you can't quite remember but can't quite forget. Something like a face in a crowd that you know you've seen before but can't place. Something like a knock on a door. I was living in Omaha in 1997. That much I remembered clearly. Margaret and I had moved there for her work. She was a physical therapist, and she'd taken a position at a rehabilitation hospital. Daniel was in his first year of community college, still living at home, still leaving his dirty laundry on the bathroom floor. Life was ordinary. Good. Unremarkable. But there was something else. Something I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten I'd buried it at all. It came back to me in fragments over the next 24 hours. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands, and I let the memories rise like bubbles from the bottom of a dark lake. A knock on the door. Late. Very late. Past midnight, maybe closer to 2 in the morning. I'd gotten up to answer it because the knocking was persistent, not loud, but insistent. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Like someone had been trained to knock that way. I opened the door to find 2 men standing on my porch. They were dressed in dark suits, the kind of suits that don't draw attention but also don't invite questions. Behind them, on the sidewalk, stood a third person. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The men did all the talking. They said they needed to use my phone. Their car had broken down, they said. They'd been driving for hours and needed to call for a tow. I remember feeling afraid. Not the sharp fear of immediate danger, but the dull, creeping fear of something being off. Their eyes didn't match their smiles. Their hands hung too still at their sides. They didn't look like men with a broken-down car. They looked like men on a mission. But Margaret was asleep upstairs. Daniel was in his room with his headphones on. And I was a man who had been raised to be helpful, to be neighborly, to open the door when someone knocked. So I let them in. The young man waited on the porch. I remember noticing that. The 2 men came inside, used the phone, a brief conversation in hushed tones that I couldn't quite follow, and then thanked me and left. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. They were gone before I could even process what had happened. But before they left, the young man on the porch looked up. His hat shifted, just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face in the porch light. Corn silk hair. A face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been so tired. And eyes that looked old. So impossibly old. He nodded at me. Just once. A small, almost imperceptible movement. And then the 3 of them walked away into the night, and I closed the door, and I went back to bed, and I never thought about it again. Until now. The photograph. The note in my own handwriting. The memory that came back like a thief in the night. He came back. You know he came back. And you did nothing. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at those words. And then I did the only thing I could think of. I looked up Noreen Gosch's phone number. It took some doing. She'd moved several times over the years, changed her number, retreated from public life. But the internet is a terrifying thing. It remembers everything, even the things we try to forget. Within an hour, I had an address and a phone number. West Des Moines. She was still there. Still waiting. I called. The phone rang 4 times. I almost hung up. I almost let the fear win, the same fear that had kept me silent for 26 years, the same fear that had let me bury that memory so deep I'd forgotten it existed. Then a woman's voice answered. Older now. Weary. But still carrying something underneath the weariness, a steel wire of determination that had never been cut. Hello. Mrs. Gosch. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat. My name is David Holloway. I live in Minnesota. I think I might have met your son. In 1997. In Omaha. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that I could hear her breath catch. What did you say? She whispered. I didn't remember until today, I said, and now the tears were coming, hot and stupid and long overdue. I didn't remember until I found a photograph in a book. I think maybe I blocked it out. I think maybe I was too afraid to let myself know what I'd seen. I told her everything. The knock on the door. The two men. The young man on the porch. The eyes that had looked too old for his face. The nod. When I finished, she was crying. Not sobbing. Noreen Gosch had probably forgotten how to sob years ago. But crying in a quiet, broken way that cut me deeper than any wail ever could. "You're the first one," she said finally. "In all these years. You're the first person who ever called to say they believed me." I drove to Des Moines the next day. 8 hours through rain and fog and the kind of gray light that makes the Midwest look like a photograph left out in the weather too long. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't stop for food. I just drove, watching the miles tick by on the odometer, feeling something shift inside me with every passing hour. Noreen Gosch was 76 years old when I knocked on her door. She was smaller than I expected, a bird of a woman, all angles and sharp edges, as if grief had worn away everything soft. Her hair was white now, cropped short, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for mine. But her eyes were exactly the same as the eyes I'd seen on that porch in 1997. Old. So impossibly old. And underneath the oldness, a flame that had never gone out. "Come in," she said. Her living room was a shrine. Not in a morbid way, not the kind of room you see on true crime shows, wallpapered with missing posters and autopsy reports. It was warmer than that. Kinder. Photographs of Johnny at every age, as a baby, as a toddler, as a little boy in a baseball uniform, as a 12-year-old with a newspaper bag slung over his shoulder. Photographs of Noreen with Johnny, Noreen without Johnny, Noreen still smiling even after the world had given her every reason to stop. "I never took them down," she said, following my gaze. "People told me I should. Said it wasn't healthy. Said I needed to move on." She shook her head. "How do you move on from a child who might still be alive? How do you close a door when you don't know if the person on the other side is still breathing?" I didn't have an answer. I'd closed the door on my own son's death because I'd had to, because there was a body, a funeral, a finality that allowed for closure. But Noreen had never had that. She'd spent 40 years in a hallway with no doors, just endless corridors stretching in every direction, each one leading to another question, another dead end, another night of staring at the ceiling and wondering. "I believe you," I said. "I don't know why I didn't remember until now. I don't know why I couldn't see what was right in front of me. But I believe you." He came back. He was there. She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving my face. "Tell me again," she said. "Tell me everything again. Don't leave anything out." So I did. I told her about the knock on the door, 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I told her about the 2 men in dark suits, about how their eyes didn't match their smiles. I told her about the phone call, the hushed voices, the way they'd thanked me and left without another word. And I told her about the young man on the porch. The hat pulled low. The corn silk hair. The nod. "Was he scared?" she asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it, reaching back through 26 years of buried memory. "No," I said finally. "Not scared. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long." Noreen nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she'd always known. "That's my boy," she said. "That's my Johnny." We talked for 3 hours. She told me things I'd never read in any article or watched in any documentary. About the early days, when the police treated her like a suspect instead of a victim. About the leads that went nowhere, the psychics who promised answers and delivered only pain, the reporters who camped on her lawn and called her a publicity seeker when she refused to play along with their narratives. She told me about the night in 1997, the night I'd been part of without even knowing it. How Johnny had shown up at her door after midnight, accompanied by the same 2 men I'd seen on my porch. How he'd held her for an hour, a grown man in his mother's arms, crying and apologizing and telling her things no mother should ever have to hear. "He told me he couldn't stay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He told me that if anyone found out he was alive, the people who took him would come after the rest of the family. His father. His grandparents. Me." She paused. He said he'd rather be dead to us than be the reason we died for real. I thought about Daniel. About the phone call that had come at 2 a.m., the one telling me my son was gone. About the hospital waiting room, the chaplain with the sad eyes, the moment when the world splits into before and after and you realize you'll never get back to the other side. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry I didn't call you sooner. I'm sorry I let myself forget. Noreen reached across the space between us and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. You didn't forget, she said. You survived. There's a difference. I stayed until sunset. Before I left, Noreen walked me to the door. The rain had stopped, finally, and the sky was doing that thing it does in the Midwest, turning the color of bruised peaches, streaked with gold and purple and the faintest hint of pink. Thank you, she said. For driving all this way. For telling me the truth. I didn't do anything, I said. I just remembered. She smiled then. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and warms them from the inside. That's everything, she said. That's the only thing any of us can do. Remember. I drove home through the dark, the headlights cutting a path through the night. And somewhere along the highway, with the radio off and the windows down and the smell of fresh rain filling the car, I started to cry. Not because I was sad. Not because I was scared. Because for the first time in 26 years, I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a framed photograph, the same school portrait I'd found in The Little Prince, the one of Johnny at 12 years old with his corn silk hair and his parted on the left haircut and his smile that made you believe the world was still safe. Taped to the back of the frame was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. For David. Who remembered? NG. I hung the photograph in my living room, right next to the picture of Daniel at his high school graduation. 2 boys. 2 mothers. 2 different kinds of grief, and 1 kind of hope. I still don't know how that photograph got into my book. I don't know if I put it there myself, in a fugue state of forgotten memory, or if something else, someone else, placed it there for me to find when I was finally ready. But here's what I do know. There are holes in this world that can never be filled. There are children who vanish and never come home. There are mothers who wait by windows for decades, watching for faces that may never appear again. There is pain so vast and so deep that it seems to swallow every good thing in its path. And yet, there is also this, a knock on a door. A photograph in a forgotten book. A phone call made after 37 years of silence. A hand reaching out to hold another hand in the gathering dark. We cannot always save each other. We cannot always bring the lost ones home. But we can remember. We can bear witness. We can say, I saw you. I heard you. You are not alone in this. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is enough. Sometimes, that is everything. The last I heard, Noreen Gosch is still waiting. Still hoping. Still telling anyone who will listen that her son came back once, and maybe, just maybe, he'll come back again. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Johnny Gosch is alive or dead, free or captive, waiting to come home or already home in a way we can't understand. But I know what I saw on a porch in Omaha in 1997. I know the nod of a young man with old eyes. I know the weight of a memory buried so deep it took 3 decades to surface. And I know that when I look at Johnny's photograph now, hanging next to my own son's, 2 boys frozen in time, I don't feel terror anymore. I feel hope. And hope, even when it's foolish, even when it's painful, even when it defies every fact and every headline and every cold case file in the world, is the most terrifying thing of all. Because hope means we haven't given up. Hope means we're still knocking on doors. Hope means somewhere out there, in the dark, someone is still listening. And that, perhaps, is the only miracle we get. That, perhaps, is enough.